Hello, my friends. My name is Tracy, and welcome to California State Park's home learning programs from Hearst Castle. I'm very excited to connect with you and to show you around this beautiful state park on California's Central Coast. There we go. I'm located on a hilltop overlooking the Pacific Ocean. We have a lot to do today. We are going to be talking about how the ancient Romans lived and how they died. Let's start out with what is in front of me. Are we even in California anymore? Standing here at the Neptune Pool, among this architecture, you just might think that we're in Athens, Greece, or at the Roman Forum in Italy. The temple structure we call the Temple Facade, with its nearly 2,000-year-old Corinthian columns, stands tall, holding up the pediment, the triangular portion of the temple. Within the pediment is a 400-year-old statuary group. In the center is the god Neptune. God of the sea. And on either side of them are two ocean goddesses, carved out of marble and limestone. This type of architecture and art is seen in several buildings today, from government buildings, religious buildings, social buildings, just like it was 2,000 years ago when the ancient Greeks and Romans were building in this style. As you can see, it still influences architectural style today. We are not in Greece, my friends. We are not in Rome. We are at Hearst Castle. We are located 3 to 4 hours north of Los Angeles. And this pool here was not built at a time of antiquity, thousands of years ago. This pool, the Neptune Pool, was built in the 1930s by William Randolph Hearst and his architect, Julia Morgan. William Randolph Hearst, a famous Californian known for his newspaper publishing business. He was a media mogul, owning radio stations, newspapers, magazines. He hires California's first licensed woman architect to build his dream home on his family's ranch on the Central Coast of California. They start in 1920 and they build throughout 28 years. He's also known for collecting art. And at Hearst Castle, there are thousands of objects in the art collection. And they decorate both the historic house or houses, there are several historic structures here, and outside in the flowering gardens. So the art that we look at today is going to help us travel back in time. And we're going to discover how the ancient Romans lived, how they died, and how they were buried. And what they were buried in, we will see here at Hearst Castle, is going to tell us stories about how they lived. So let's head up this way. We're going to walk through the gardens at Hearst Castle. And we're going to learn a little bit more about the ancient Romans. It's a beautiful day at the monument. Clear blue skies. A nice 68 degrees to make it a crisp fall day. Little to no wind. We are still closed to the public since March. for the pandemic, during the COVID pandemic. We're not sure when we're going to reopen. This is the perfect ticket to see Hearst Castle, this virtual tour. This is the way in. And it's been pretty quiet. It's been us and the birds. So thank you for joining me today. I see our first stop coming up. The ancient Romans still influence us today. And if you didn't think that you had something in common with them, you're going to learn that you do. And Ryan here, my friend and fellow guide Ryan.
Hello.
Hi, Ryan, is going to introduce us to our first piece of Roman funerary art.
Well, I would love to. Does anybody know what this is? Can you take a guess? What does it look like? I'm going to give you the answer.
Wait, let's guess a little bit more.
Okay.
Let's give some clues.
Okay, some clues.
It's really long.
It's long.
And it's not very wide.
Very wide.
What's going on inside?
It looks as if you might be able to lie down in it.
Oh, it's empty.
Uh-huh.
Well, we are talking about how the Romans died and their burial practices. This must be a coffin. Is that right?
It is absolutely right. And it's called a sarcophagus. And a sarcophagus in a dictionary, I'll give you a definition: a stone coffin, which is exactly what this is. And it has sculptures or inscriptions on the outside of it. And it's associated with the ancient civilizations: Egypt, Rome, Greece. A sarcophagus, the word sarcophagus literally translates to flesh eating. So this is how people were buried back in ancient Egypt and ancient Rome. And as you can see, there are sculptures on the outside of the sarcophagus here. And these are all children of Zeus. He's the supreme deity, but these are all gods and goddesses themselves. There's Apollo here in the middle. He was the god of music and poetry, amongst other things. There's Athena. She's the goddess of wisdom and war. And then there are 9 sisters. These are the Muses. Does anybody know what a muse is? A muse is usually depicted as a goddess, and she is a source of inspiration for somebody who is an artist or a writer or a philosopher. So each one of these muses represents some pursuit of artistic or academic endeavor. One of my favorites is Thalia. She is the muse of comedy. And if anybody's familiar with the theater or drama, you can see she's holding one of these masks, the frowny face or the happy face. There's Erato here. She's the muse of lyrical poetry. She carries an instrument, looks sort of like a guitar, doesn't it? Tracy, do you have a muse you like the most?
We're going to go down here to one of my favorite muses. Let's check out these 3 ladies.
All right.
I love how the clothing that they wear is beautifully carved out of marble, but it looks so soft.
Mm-hmm.
Terpsichore has another one of those stringed instruments called a lyre, and she's the goddess of dance. And then next to her, the goddess of dance is actually standing next to the goddess of astronomy. So she's got a pointer with a globe, and she's a stargazing goddess. And next to her is the goddess of history. Now, this is going to tell us a little bit about what school children were using to write with thousands of years ago. Instead of having an iPad or a tablet, they had something that looked like that, but it was actually a wax tablet. So the surface of their writing document, I guess, what they would write on, was covered in wax. And then they would use a stylus, which hers broke off. You could see she's holding something in her hand. She's got the end of there. It's kind of like a pointer. And they would carve into the wax surface of their paper. or writing documents. So that's what they would use then. And she's the goddess of history. What is fascinating, Ryan, there used to be someone buried in this sarcophagus. Is that right?
That is absolutely right.
But we do not know whatever happened to the body.
We don't know because it was a really long time ago.
How old is this?
Well, this is a 3rd century sarcophagus. We think that it was built somewhere around the year 230, which was quite a long time ago. We're in the year 2020 right now. Anybody, any quick math people out there? How old around is this? Do you have any answers? It's going to be almost 1,800 years old. And it looks pretty good, doesn't it? For being that old. It's been taken very well care of. It's been preserved already. And it's made out of lasting materials, limestone and marble, because the idea was so it could last throughout the ages. And so this is already over almost 1,800 years old and probably going to last another 1,800 years and possibly longer than that.
That's fascinating. And to think that an ancient Roman was buried in here, and they decided that they were going to have the Muses on their sarcophagus. And the Muses represent the arts and the sciences. And that tells us that the person who was buried in here thought the arts and the sciences were very important. Dance, poetry, music, history, astronomy, theater, comedy and tragedy.
Right.
If you ever thought that you couldn't relate to someone who lived 2,000 years ago, well, if you like to be entertained, you might be watching some Netflix tonight. You know the comedy and tragedy masks. You can relate with an ancient Roman because they like to be entertained too. But this was before Broadway, before Hollywood television. So they were more acting out plays on stages.
That's right.
This is a beautiful sarcophagus. And we're going to see that Mr. Hearst had it as a part of his art collection. It becomes a collectible, an item that an art collector would purchase and display. And this isn't his only one.
That's true. He has 9 of these.
Wow, 9. So we're going to continue down this path right here called the Esplanade. Thank you, Ryan, for sharing with us the Muses sarcophagus.
You're very welcome. Bye.
And we'll see if there's any more sarcophagi. Y'all want to say that with me? Sarcophagi. That is the plural for it. And I see another one up ahead. Do you spot it yet? Now, Mr. Hearst isn't the first art collector to put this type of art in his gardens, in his formal, beautiful flowering gardens. He's not the first type. It's been going on for hundreds of years. Wealthy art collectors in Europe had been doing it during the Renaissance. And then we'll find out where these sarcophagi originally were. Well, hello, Chris.
Hello.
How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
Good. I've got my friends out here, and we are discovering the sarcophagi of Hearst Castle, and it looks like you're standing next to another one.
That's right. Right here we've got another sarcophagus. We have many sarcophagi. Sarcophagus is one. Sarcophagi means many. And this is our only one that actually still has this lid to it. And normally they would have a lid, but over time they got damaged or lost. And so this is our only one that still actually has the lid to it. And the Roman people, they originally practiced cremation. They would burn a body and then store the ashes in an urn, which usually would go inside a tomb. So that's what they did early on. But the Greek people and the Etruscan people who lived in the same area as the Romans, they actually used sarcophagi to bury their dead. And so over time, the Romans also adopted using sarcophagi too. So they practiced what's called inhumation, which just means to bury a body, either in the ground or in something like a tomb or a sarcophagus. And this one, we actually know the name of the man who was laid to rest in here.
We're going to get up close here.
And on the second line there, it says C. Insteo. That was his name, Insteo. And of course, he was gone long ago. The body would have been lost over time, and Mr. Hearst just bought this as an art piece. But it calls him the Great One. Maximo means great or great one. And doesn't tell us why he was so great, but it tells us that he was only 20 years, 9 months old when he died. He wasn't quite 21 years old. But back then, about 2,000 years ago, because this is from the 2nd century, that's a little older than the one Ryan just showed you. It's about 2,000 years old. Way back then, they didn't have the kind of medicines that we do today, and so people generally didn't live as long as we do today. So he wasn't quite 21 years old. And this one I think is kind of interesting. It has some interesting symbols on it. For one, it's got these Cupid figures. If you notice, it's a young boy with wings on his back. Cupid was the god of love. So perhaps this symbolized that the people that made this sarcophagus for Insteo, maybe it symbolizes that they loved him very much. Down below here, you can see what is called a cornucopia. 2 of them actually. Cornucopia means horn of plenty, and that was a symbol of abundance. So this could have symbolized that he had an abundant life. Maybe he was very wealthy, or maybe they're hoping that he has an abundant afterlife. The Romans and the Greeks, they believed that after people died, they had an afterlife, much like people do today. And depending on whether you had a good or bad life, you would go to a good or bad afterlife. So maybe they're wishing that he has an abundant and happy afterlife. And then this one has my favorite thing right over here. And you see this face here. It's kind of hard to notice, but down below here, almost looks like ropes are tied around her face here. But if you look close, there's scales on there. And in fact, these are snakes. And so she has snakes for hair. And that was a mythological figure called a Gorgon, Gorgon, a Gorgon. And they were these mythological women that had snakes for hair. Probably the most famous Gorgon from mythology is Medusa. Medusa appears in many of the Greek and Roman myths. And Gorgons were thought to be apotropaic figures. Apotropaic. That word means that they were thought to ward off evil or bad luck. So this could symbolize that they're trying to protect Insteo in the next life from evil or bad forces. That was to ward off evil. I think since we're coming up on Halloween, if you go as any figure from Greek or Roman mythology, a good choice would be a Medusa or a Gorgon figure. I think I'm going to go as a ninja this year because I'm already almost there. But that's our covered sarcophagus, our only one that still has this covered to it.
Wow, that's fascinating to look at this limestone sarcophagus that's nearly 2,000 years old and to really understand how the Romans lived by what they put on their burial coffin, basically. And we know that Mr. Hearst has how many of them? He's got 9 of them.
9 of these different sarcophagi.
So we've seen 2 so far. We're going to actually see this garland again in the future on another one. It's called a festoon, and it also was used to decorate the sarcophagi and used during times of celebration and festivals. Chris, thank you. I might be Medusa for Halloween. You make a great ninja. So trick or treat. Happy
Thanks,
Halloween.
Happy Halloween.
Let's head up this way. So we see that the sarcophagus was on this path called the esplanade. But where would the sarcophagi be when they were original, when they were brand new? I've got this image. It's of a road. Oh, never mind. The image isn't working. But I wanted to share where these would have originally been. And they would have been on a road, oftentimes, the roads that lead in and out of Rome. So these are not buried in the city, inside the city. It would actually be outside the city, and they wouldn't be buried at all. They would be along the side of the road, like we see the covered sarcophagus here. And the Muse sarcophagus over there, it'd be right next to the road, because oftentimes these sarcophagi, these ancient Roman coffins, weren't just for the dead, they were for the living as well. So the living members of the family and the passerbyers could go and look and read about these people's lives, look at the symbolism on the sarcophagi, and understand who was there. It was about the lasting memory and the legacy of the individual. And that's part of the reason why they're so decorative. Now we see another sarcophagus, but there's actually two different types of Roman funerary art. We've got our friend Andy's looking inside. Should we take a quick look?
Wait, there's dead people in there. Oh.
Wait, is there? Well, from my understanding, there's no ghosts at Hearst Castle. We get that question a lot. It's not haunted, but who knows what happens when we all go home, right? All right, Andy, we've got some fascinating portraits going on here.
Well, there's two funerary pieces here. One is a relief and the other is a sarcophagus. And maybe we'll talk about the sarcophagus first. And as you've learned, sarcophagi are basically coffins where ancient civilizations buried their dead. And we don't know if there was actually a dead body in here at one time, but I'll get to that a little bit later. First of all, what are we looking at? Maybe if you can come over here, Tracy.
Sure.
Some of the ornamentation on the sides are lions attacking skags. They're killing them. And you can see how this lion is biting into the head. See those holes in there? The head of the skag. And over here, I don't know if you can see that, the neck, he's already attacked there, one of the most vulnerable spots on the stag. So those frame, two lions and two stags frame the sarcophagi. And what's in the middle? Well, a couple. And we call it a double portrait medallion, perhaps a married couple. They're flanked by two erotes or cupids, the symbol of love. And we even have the names of the couple down here, Julia and Coccius, written in Latin. And did Julia and Coccius ever reside in the sarcophagus? Well, maybe not. And that's where the controversy comes in. Hearst bought the sarcophagus in 1925, buying it as a 1800-year-old Roman sarcophagus. But over the years, scholars have examined this piece and they came to the conclusion that it's a 19th century copy. And there were a couple of things they didn't like on the sarcophagus. For example, stylistic elements. The ancient Romans, for example, would have never put fig leaves over the cupids. That was something they wouldn't have done. And there's also other items that they didn't think matched a ancient Roman sarcophagi. But as time went on, other scholars have looked at the piece and now they're not so sure that it's a fake or forgery anymore. What they think is that perhaps it started as an unfinished ancient Roman sarcophagi. And then in the 19th century, people carved on it and gave the decoration onto their sarcophagus. And why did they do that? Well, sarcophagi were very much a collector's item at one time, and the art world becomes very creative when it comes to meeting art items that are in high demand, or the demand for art items. So again, we don't know if somebody ever resided in the sarcophagus. It may be a little bit ancient and a little bit modern. That's in contrast to the three busts that we see up here. So this is called a relief, and it's 2,000 years old. This is the real deal. We know that it's genuine. And we think it shows a husband and wife. You can see they're closer together, their gaze going towards a common point, maybe to denote the life they spent together. And over to the right, a little further away, we think it's the sun. He's looking a little bit more straightforward. And perhaps because he's carving his own destiny and his own future and making his own life. And what kind of life did these three people have? Well, we don't really know much about it, but we do know one thing. They were slaves. And we know that because scholars have identified these types of profiles as being there to commemorate deceased slaves that had been freed. They're called Freedmen Profiles. And this one again, 2,000 years old. It's the real deal. So we have two examples of two types of funerary art. One authentic and genuine. The other one maybe a little bit real, a little bit fake.
That's fascinating. So we have a grave marker on top and a coffin on the bottom. And so far we've seen different types of imagery on the coffin. We have seen scenes of mythology. When we were with Ryan and saw the Muses, we saw an epitaph on the last sarcophagus, which had a cover on it, and that told us the person's name and how long they lived. And this one is has portraiture on it. So there are several different scenes that a sarcophagus can have to tell stories about who potentially was buried in there. And then it's the same thing with the grave marker on top. And it's fascinating that these pieces of Roman funerary art can tell us a little bit more about social status during the Roman Empire as well, that people who were slaves could become free. And basically everyone wants to be remembered here. And these are, again, made sometimes more for the living than for the dead, in a sense. And Andy and I are still talking about these people, right? We're still remembering them today. Thank you, Andy.
You're
We're
very
gonna
welcome.
head over this way. So do you remember where these sarcophagi would be? If we were in ancient Rome right now, we would have to travel outside of the city and go down the main roads, and we would see the sarcophagi on either side, and we could stop and look at the symbols and think about the stories that each one of these pieces was telling us. And they're telling us fascinating stories about people who lived long ago, but how they lived, what their life was like. And here in front of La Casa Grande, the big house, which is what we call Hearst Castle today, where William Randolph Hearst lived and collected his art. We're in his front yard, the main terrace. And right over here, he has another piece of Roman funerary art. Here's our friend Paula.
Hi, everyone.
Hi. So this is a little bit different than what we've seen so far. Oh,
Today we're talking about gravestones, headstones, tombstones. These are all names for the same kind of memorial marker that we see in cemeteries. And if you've gone to a cemetery, you have surely seen them. They're plentiful, they're everywhere. They're carved out of different kinds of stone, like granite or marble. There was a passage of time where they were carved out of wood. But that tradition did not start in our modern culture. It goes back more than 5,000 years. So during those millennia, there was always one culture or another that was practicing that tradition of remembering those people who shared the earth with us and then passed on. Well, here we have a sippus. This is a Roman funerary marker. It's carved out of marble. It dates back more than 2,000 years. It's from the 1st century AD or CE, CE being Common Era. And it has a number of decorations that would have made it special for its time. On each corner, there are these ram's heads. Below the ram's heads on the front corners are griffins, which are winged lions. Draping between the ram's heads and griffins is a festoon that goes around 3 sides. And a festoon is kind of a stringed draping decoration. We see it sometimes in garlands at the holidays, or if you've twisted crepe paper and hung it for a birthday party, those are types of festoons. In between, this is an open-winged eagle. Everything's carved out of the same marble, so sometimes it's a little hard to depict the decoration that's carved out of the stone. On each side, there are more decorations. The festoon over here curves around a bird and a flower. The back is plain. It probably would have been against a solid surface. And on the other side, the festoon curves around a wine jug. There's an inscription on this sippus, an inscription that comes, it has the same root as the word scribe, which means writer or to write. This inscription, roughly translated, means by the federality of the Emperor Titus Flavius. So he would have been the emperor of Rome during part of the 1st century, and certainly at the time of Antonius's death. This particular sippus was once part of the art collection of William Randolph Hearst, who built this estate. And today, it's part of the art collection of this accredited museum we know as Hearst Castle, but it does still serve its original purpose, because Jason, who created this for his father Antonius, his intention would have been to have his father remembered. And since we're all standing here today and talking about Antonius, remembering him and his son, it's doing its job.
It is doing its job. And it's interesting, the inscription mentions the emperor at the time of the individual's death. So they're putting the name of the emperor on their gravestone, indicating a place and time. And Flavius, he was known for completing the Roman Colosseum. So we're also connecting another building in Rome to this time period. So that's pretty fascinating that this was created around the same time as the completion of the Roman Colosseum. That's a long time ago. And it's an example of how the ancient people, the Romans, still influence us today when you were talking about the festoons, these garlands at the bottom. That's quite interesting. Well, thank you, Paula.
You're very
That was
welcome.
fascinating
Yeah,
to learn about the
everyone.
Sippus. There's still more to see, and there's still a lot of stories to be told. And Paula was accurate when she said these are for memorial purposes, for the memory, for the people that come after. The Romans were concerned with a great legacy, and there's so many examples of Roman culture right here at Hearst Castle. Maybe even in your hometown, you might have buildings with columns like we saw at the Neptune Pool. So this is going to be a different scene than what we've seen so far. Scenes of portraits of people, mythology. Well, hello, Laurel. We were talking about the different scenes that show up that are depicted as reliefs on sarcophagi.
Okay. Well, this sarcophagus was created between 160 and 170 AD. It's Roman, like so much of what you've seen so far, but this one actually depicts a scene from ancient Greek history, which is a battle between the Greeks and the Amazons. Now, Herodotus, the historian, and Homer, the poet, both talk about the Amazons, and Greek artists were crazy about depicting Amazons on everything. You'll find Amazons depicted on friezes, on temples, in mosaics, and on Greek pots that date back over 2,500 years. The Roman culture loved to borrow from other cultures. And when Roman generals started bringing Greek art back to Rome, the Roman aristocracy fell in love with Greek art and Greek culture. So it's fitting that somebody would want to have a scene from ancient Greek history and mythology on their sarcophagus. Now, Paula was just talking about legacies and remembering, and we can learn a lot about people based upon what they chose to put on their sarcophagi. This person wanted to connect themselves with Greek history, and obviously they were fairly wealthy because they were able to afford this marble sarcophagus, which is elaborately carved in a fairly high relief. Now, for a long time, modern historians and archaeologists believed that the Amazons were simply a myth, like the Cyclops or the Centaur, that they probably didn't exist. But then modern archaeologists started looking at accounts from lots of different cultures. The Greeks talk about a race of women warriors. The Romans do too. So do the Chinese, and so do the Persians. And so archaeologists dug a little deeper, and now many believe that there really were women warriors in the ancient world, and that they were likely centered around the Black Sea, likely part of the Scythian culture. The Scythians were nomads. They traveled all the time, they raised livestock like cattle, and they were very fierce in battle. They used horses in battle, and they also developed the recurve bow, which made them fearsome. They could fire rapidly arrows into their enemies. And these two technologies, riding on horseback and using a bow and arrow, meant that a woman warrior could be just as fierce as a man. And now when archaeologists are looking back at Scythian graves, they're looking at them with a fresh set of eyes. For a long time, they assumed that any skeleton buried with weapons was a man. But now they're doing DNA testing, and that they found a large percentage of the Scythian warrior burials were actually women. So there's a good chance that the Amazons weren't just a myth, that there were women warriors. And that's what's being depicted on this Roman sarcophagus.
Beautiful. I think I know my Halloween costume this year. Chris Bradley suggested Medusa, but we might be some Amazon women. Fierce individuals. Here's one right there. And then we have a Greek right here. We can see the male figure with the helmet and the female figure on the horse.
Right, and often in this, the Amazon figures will have more clothing on, whereby the Greeks will generally not have as much clothing on. And the Amazons are often depicted on horseback. Both boys and girls learn to ride at a very early age. And one thing that made the Scythian warriors so fierce was that they were able to turn almost all the way backwards on their horse, so they could still fire arrows at you even as they were riding away.
Fascinating. So many different stories that the sarcophagi tell. Thank you, Laurel.
Oh, my pleasure.
We have one more to see down this way. Now, when someone passed away, there would be a funeral procession. And the procession might go down a long road, just like we're walking down this road. And there would be a large group of people. But if they didn't know that many people, they might even be able to hire professional mourners. So paying someone else to cry at your funeral, to beat your chest, to wail and moan. That would be an interesting job. But they would have people mourning and crying, and sometimes they were being paid to do it. There might be musicians as part of the funeral procession through town. So it wasn't just the sarcophagus that was extravagant. And sometimes it was the actual procession. The Romans had several holidays which commemorated the dead, where the family and the ancestors would arrive bringing gifts.
And we happen to have that situation right here.
Hi,
Hello,
Sherry.
everyone. So we have a goddess, and we're not positive who it is, but it's most likely Ceres or Demeter in Greek. And you can tell because she's got a cornucopia here. And usually she had wheat or a cornucopia because she was the goddess of agriculture and the harvest. So this procession of people that are here, they're here to give her gifts because they want to make sure their harvests or things they're planting are successful. So that's their gift to the goddess. And this sarcophagus here, this portion that you're looking at with the egg and dart that you see across the front, that pattern, is possibly a forgery.
Another forgery.
Yeah.
We saw one with Andy.
Did you? Well, this might be from the 19th century here, but Mr. Hearst purchased this as a first century sarcophagus in 1921.
Which means that it would be about 2,000 years old. That's what he thought it was when he bought it.
And it could be that this portion was, but this added portion might be the 19th century part.
We saw the same thing with Andy, where we thought that the structure, the body of the sarcophagus itself could have been from the ancient Roman Empire. And then the carvings on it were added a lot later. That's interesting that this happens.
Yes, because they can get more money when they sell them with carvings on them than if they're just plain. So that was probably their motivation.
And let's see what we have going on here. So we see the possible goddess of agriculture, and people are bringing her gifts. They could be looking to pray to her for good crop. Trying to get my shadow out of there. We have someone bringing a small doll or statue.
That could be bread, possibly.
An offering of some sort of food. And then this person has a vessel, so there could be wine in there.
Or oil, possibly, either one.
Let's see, we have a child walking with an animal. That could be a sacrifice, potentially.
There's little horns there, so I bet it's some kind of ram, possibly.
So there's several people in this procession that are bringing the goddess gifts. But when someone died or when there was a Roman holiday, they would bring gifts to the dead where the dead were buried. So we see this gift giving both to people who had passed and to the gods and goddesses. So interesting Roman traditions. Thank you so much, Sherry, for
My
sharing that with
pleasure.
us.
It's nice to see everybody. Have a great day.
And these are the sorts of things that you would see at Hearst Castle. Hopefully we'll open to the public again soon. We have been closed, like I said. But Hearst Castle is a fascinating story. And there's all these little stories within because every piece of art has its own history. We've got beautiful views, beautiful architecture and historic structures, thousands of pieces of art in the Hearst Art Collection, and much, much more. So thank you for joining me today and all our guides and friends here at Hearst Castle, learning about how the ancient Romans were buried, remembered, and in turn, learning about how they lived their lives and their culture. So thanks so much. Have a great day.